Gather your party before venturing forth.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dungeon Pub. It is once again the Happy Hour Show, and I am once again your very humble bartender. Today, I am also very, very excited. Why, you might ask? Because it's time for Paladins.
Judgment time.
Oh yeah, it's time for us to talk about the Zealots. The guys with the shiny armor and the big swords and the excessive, very often, amounts of religion. Disclaimer time. Everything that we say about religion and that type of cultural diversity should not be taken seriously. This is a game, okay? Don't take it too personal. Moving right along. Paladins. We have had so many great paladins in our games. Well, to be fair, we've had that one guy who keeps playing one for so many years now. If you're listening to this, you know who I'm talking about. Apart from this, I've also had this opinion for a long time regarding paladins and the way they're played and the way they're intended and what is exactly supposed to be a paladin. So when we begin this quick discussion, and in your mind you have the vision of a crusader, this knight in shining armor or maybe just a very dirty chainmail who holds a sword and his faith above all else, you're not getting the wrong idea. That's essentially what a paladin is. But behind that shiny or grimy exterior, there is a lot of subtle detail that very often goes mistakenly, I would say, unrecognized. What do I mean? Well, let's start with this. What differentiates a paladin from every other kind of sword-toting, armor-wielding character out there? First and foremost, paladins go off of their faith. That is the most important bit. The faith of a paladin is his or her strongest weapon. So, what does that mean? Consider a fighter in chainmail with a tabard and riding on a horse and killing the enemies of your only true and rightful faith. That's not a paladin. No, there is a very severe difference. Considering historical crusaders, those were not necessarily paladins. Those were men and women, mostly men to be fair, that wanted to gain something. They fought for a reason, and it wasn't necessarily always about God. It was more about, well, you know, political standing and, you know, turf and ground, and you just don't want the other guys to have it. A paladin rises way above those petty ideas. A paladin is more an example of what a true warrior of the faith is supposed to be like. So when you're sitting there looking at that book and reading the fluff about how paladins are all shiny and good-like and they're supposed to be lawful and good, not necessarily, not anymore. In previous editions they were. Yes, in previous editions it was actually a requirement for the paladin to be a specific alignment. But in 5th edition, they went about it a very different way, which is something I very greatly appreciate. Also, secondary disclaimer, in this video we're going to talk a lot about stuff that we haven't spoken about previously, like alignment and religion in D&D and pretty much every pen and paper RPG. We're going to be talking about gods and what they stand for, very briefly though, but the overall idea is for us to discuss the concept of a paladin. So let's go from this, and from what we've said so far, shining armor, check. Large sword or hammer, check. Religious fanaticism, not necessarily. This is the first and actual change that they made, and I adore it. Later on, when we get to the tenets, you will see what I mean. But before we get to that, let's insert the following idea. A paladin is not a fighter. A paladin is not a soldier. A paladin is a knight. Go back in your memories to the first idea of a knight that you ever had. This gentleman, this cavalier, a person whose faith is so tightly woven into his personality that it's not only a requirement for his position, but it also makes up the reason why this person is so venerated. That's what a paladin is. A knight, surely, but the idea behind the knight more so than the actual purpose, let's say. And speaking of purpose, the purpose of a paladin is different than that of a fighter. A fighter is supposed to be a soldier. A fighter is supposed to be someone who lives during combat. A paladin has a much more astute purpose in life and is supposed to. Being so, let's say, tightly woven with the religious ideal of what a man is supposed to be like, and when by man I mean mortal, human, if you want to look at it that way, not necessarily the gender. That is what a paladin is striving to be, not a killing machine for the foes of whatever deity you have chosen. So, with these things in mind, that idea that you might be having is not tarnished, but instead it's more polished. When you make your character, and that character is going to be a paladin, consider the fact that swinging that sword and being all shiny in that armor is not necessarily the point. The point is you are fighting for something greater. You are trying to be something greater than just a man in shining armor. Now that we have that, there is something very important that I want to insert before we get into the rest of the class. Paladins gain abilities, much like everyone else, but unlike the fighter and unlike the garden variety barbarian, unlike even the ranger who can cast spells, paladins gain their magical power in a very unique way. Consider clerics. Clerics are supposed to be the religious representation of an RPG character, right? If you think about someone serving a deity, you're thinking cleric. So where does the paladin come in? Charisma. You will quickly find out, especially in the beginning of that book, charisma is the stat that gives a paladin his or her powers, not wisdom. When we consider what those two mean, wisdom is your senses of the world and also combines to be your experience of your conscious life. That's why skills like medicine, perception go off of wisdom. What goes off of charisma? Personality. Not so much outer exterior appearance, but your personality, the way you hang yourself around other people, the way you behave with other people, but also what you believe in your mind is you. Once you make that distinction, instantly you begin to see where paladins come into play. It's their faith, not their understanding of the ways of the gods, that make them what they are. That is unbelievably important. It will go off into a lot of the discussions that people are going to have around the table, and it's also the key behind avoiding that stigma of being the stick in the mud paladin who's also always lawful good and trying to do good by the people, and everything that happens in his life is some kind of a trial. No. Haha. No. When you consider the very fact that it's charisma that gives you your power and it is your personality, now it's about the way you roleplay. Those personality traits that have become so amazing in 5th edition, coupled with the tenets that I already mentioned that we will talk to, particularly in this video, make up the difference between a paladin and just a fighter who's fighting for whatever reason. Purpose makes all the difference in the world. So, I assume you've already gotten enough of the art and the shiny armor and the the epicness of the concept. Let's drive more into what makes a paladin a paladin. First and foremost, martial class. You have proficiency in martial weapons, you have proficiency in all armors and shields. The fighter is the other class that gets this, but here is where the similarities between the two classes end. The paladin then continues on to give you proficiency in the saving throws of charisma and wisdom. Aha! What? Hey, aren't you supposed to be a warrior? Why would you have proficiency in those? Well, as I kept saying so far, you are not necessarily the vanguard soldier with the giant sword. You are supposed to have a much different approach to things. And the enemies that you're supposed to be fighting are not necessarily made of flesh and blood. I'm talking demons and infernals and Yugoloth and any other kind of evil outsider. Again, we're talking about the classic paladin. I know there's other variations. The classic paladin is supposed to have those as enemies. Not like the ranger, per se, with an ability, but more so as an idea. Your alignment is going to determine a lot of that as well. Skills, choose 2. Athletics, insight, intimidation, medicine, persuasion, religion. Not that much of a choice, to be fair. Not that much of variety. The paladin is not supposed to be skillful. You have your rogues for that. You have your rangers for that. Rangers get 1 additional skill, never forget. But a paladin is not geared towards being the person with the lockpicks or the person to remember things about history. Intelligence is most probably going to be your dumb stat. So there you go. Your selection of skills is actually the weakest among all the classes, I believe, from what I've seen. But that is, sir or madam, not the point. In terms of weaponry, simple weapons, martial weapons, again, all the weapons, all armor, all shields. That's supposed to tell you something. You are a fighter, but you're not the fighter class. You are a warrior of the faith. In terms of equipment, pretty standard ordeal, pretty much essentially the same as the fighter with a few different options. And now before we get into the abilities, once again, I want to very specifically state, paladins are a very unique and very specific concept. Going back to our Western history of the Chevalier and all of those orders that began as far back as Charlemagne, a paladin is more a concept, an idea behind the character rather than these abilities that you will get. But, with that being said, keep in mind, this is some of the best stuff in terms of an actual playable character. Paladins are really, really good at what they do, and these abilities very often are unique. There is no counterpart, there is no other thing in the game that can do what you can do, considering auras, considering the smites. So keep that in mind as we go. Some of these might essentially look a bit weird to you, but when you remember that you're not supposed to be out there disarming enemies and throwing spears, instead you're supposed to be doing something else, these abilities will guide you to that destination. Let's begin. Divine Sense. Divine Sense is the beginning of the Paladin class, and it's one of its more underwhelming abilities in terms of sheer mechanics, but in terms of utility and what it can bring to your concept, it's amazing. Very simplistically said, within 60 feet, you know the type of creature and also a few other interesting details. This is meant to reveal things, not to point you to something. If you're standing next to someone and you're trying to figure out whether that person is supposed to be smitten or not, this is gonna help you. But this is where, this is essentially where it ends. The cool mechanic here is that you can use it a number of times equal to 1 plus your charisma modifier. We're gonna get into the stat allocation in the third part. This is how we do the videos. But before we get to that part, Paladins are weird when it comes to stat allocation. So abilities like this are already intended to point you in that direction. You're not a simple fighter. Strength, Constitution is not gonna cut it. You need more things. You need charisma as well, but you might also need that wisdom. Maybe you're going for a dex build, so consider the Paladin being a very, very stat-intensive character. Other abilities that you get at level 1, Lay on Hands. This is the classic. If you've ever played World of Warcraft, you know what this does. Also, speaking of World of Warcraft, that has also helped in creating this strange and unrealistic approach to Paladinism. But Lay on Hands is very similar to what you might believe if you've ever played World of Warcraft. It heals. It heals in a very specific way. You get a number of points available per level, or rather coming off of your maximum Paladin levels, and then you can spend them using your main action. Level 2, much like the Ranger, you can specialize into some kind of a fighting style, but unlike the Ranger, here you have different options. Much like the Ranger, some are missing, but unlike the Ranger, here you have the defensive stuff. Defense is there for you, protection is also there for you though. Paladins can be very good tanks. They can be some of the most amazing frontline combatants, and dare I say, barring some very amazing min-maxing from the fighters and the barbarians, maybe even the best of them. Consider that when you're making your character. This class will give you the defensive options. It will give you dueling and greater weapon fighting. So what you're going for is one-handed weapons and shields, or maybe just going for the big guns. And when I say guns, I mean Zweihanders and greatswords. Spellcasting, also at level 2. Preparing and casting spells, as I already said in the Ranger review, Paladins get to prepare their spells. They don't get to learn them outright. This is a bonus and a plus because you can actually swap them out more. The ability is right there in front of you. You can go ahead and read it for the interest of saving time. This is standard stuff. Spellcasting ability is charisma for you, so I can't drive that home enough. Charisma is important to a Paladin. This is your maybe secondary stat. Not even Constitution is that important as your faith and your personality. Interesting point though, Paladins do get a spellcasting focus, so you can actually benefit from that. Also at level 2, Divine Smite. And this is where pretty much everybody who's ever considered playing a Paladin is going, yes! Divine Smite is probably what you're here for. Starting at second level, when you hit a creature with a melee weapon attack, you can expend 1 Paladin spell slot to deal radiant damage to the target, in addition to the weapon's damage. Oh dear lord. And pun very heavily intended. Melee attacks only, that is the only drawback, but when you get past that and you realize that you're supposed to be out there in the face of whatever's trying to hurt your friends, and in extension probably you're going to be in melee a lot. And if you have that giant sword and maybe that shield, oh, this is so good. You hit, you state that you give one of your spell slots to the attack, you deal extra damage. The damage scales, it becomes very well rounded. This is one of the best class abilities of all time probably. Other than that though, level 2, this is only what you get. Level 3, Divine Health. By third level, the divine magic flowing through you makes you immune to disease. Fluff, yeah, disease is not that common, to be fair, but it does make you understand that this faith that you carry in your mind and in your personality is actually, in this fantastical world, giving you power. It is giving you this magical imbuement, if you want to look at it that way, and it does allow you to be completely immune to one of the conditions. So, very powerful. At level 3, you also get to pick a Sacred Oath. We're going to talk about those in the next video. That's going to be part 2 of the Paladin. For now, I intend to go through only the main stuff, just so that we have those out of the way before we get to the other specificities. Ability score improvements. 4th level, 8th level, 12th level, 16th, 19th. So you get 5. You're not a fighter. Again, you're not a rogue. You are a different kind of animal. You are something else. But in terms of how many you get, you're pretty much like everyone else. And they do the same thing. If I need to repeat myself, +2 to 1 stat, +1 to 2 stats, or you get to pick a feat. And given the fact that paladins are very, very, very stat intensive, you're gonna need more improvements rather than feats. Level 5, extra attack. You get to attack twice, much like the hunters, much like some other classes. Unlike the fighter, however, you get to do 2. Barbarians still get to do 2. They also get to have all the girls, but you are shiny, so that might help in certain situations. Aura of Protection. Starting at 6th level, whenever you or a friendly creature within 10 feet of you must make a saving throw, the creature gains a bonus to the saving throw equal to your charisma modifier, with a minimum bonus of +1. What? Really? That much? This ability is off the grid. It's off the chain. It's unbelievable. And I've seen it go to very high levels because of the fact that we've had a very high level paladin playing in our games. This is amazing. It's so cool. But wait, it's not even over. At 18th level, if you manage to get that far in the progression, the range of this aura increases to 30 feet. So 30 feet around you, dear Lord, whoever that Lord may be, this is amazing. This is very powerful. Moving right along, 10th level, Aura of Courage. Starting at 10th level, you and friendly creatures within 10 feet of you can't be frightened while you are conscious. Again, the same aura mechanic. This one is also amazing, but it just gives you immunity to 1 condition. So it's good, it's always on, it's always there for you, but it's nowhere near the levels of Aura of Protection in terms of how amazing it is. 11th level, improved Divine Smite. Much like the hunters, much like the barbarians, much like the fighters. At 11th level, martial classes get something that makes their attacking better. So remember, rangers used to have those 2 abilities that make you either amazing at ranged or amazing at melee. Fighters got to have a 3rd attack, barbarians got to have their own thing, but paladins, they get to improve their Divine Smite. Once again, driving home the point that Divine Smite is essentially what you're good at, and it's essentially what you're supposed to be doing, but not all the time. When it counts, when you're supposed to. So, essentially what the ability does is it adds extra 1d8s to your radiant damage. Pretty powerful, pretty cool, always on passively for you. And lastly, at level 14, Cleansing Touch. Beginning at 14th level, you can use your action to end 1 spell on yourself or on 1 willing creature that you touch. You can use this feature a number of times equal to your charisma. Again, same as Divine Sense. You regain expended uses when you finish a long rest. And this is it. To be fair, this is pretty much all that paladins get to have. Might seem little, but they get to have additional abilities and spell slots, or rather spell selection, and, well, the tenets when they get to choose their speciality. So we're gonna talk about this in the next video, but before we get there, I said I'm going to, and I want to mention this, because this is unique, and this is amazing. Tenets. These tenets are essentially what makes you the most different melee, or rather martial class out there. They are ideas, they are guidelines that for some reason you have in your life, either through your order or because you have chosen them. You get to have this in your character sheet. Other than your personality traits, bonds, and ideals, you get to have the tenets. And through the extended books, there are more that you can add, but even without them, the idea is very, very well written down in the player's handbook. You can also select your own. You can sit down with your DM, you can discuss the way that this paladin needs to be, maybe ask your DM if there's any specific orders in the world where you're going to be playing, and then build your tenets around this idea. Very simplistically, I'm going over the very first ones that I see. Those are for the Oath of Devotion. Honesty, don't lie or cheat, let your word be your promise. Courage, never fear to act though caution is wise. Compassion, aid others, protect the weak, and punish those who threaten them. These are obscenely good. And if you're sitting on the other side of that video and you're thinking, Bartender dude, why are you gushing over a bunch of paladin stuff? Because this is the second part of the key to not being a boring stick in the mud. You can have your alignment. You can be lawful good. Go ahead. You can also be chaotic good. You can be lawful neutral. for all the game cares now. Back in the day, it used to be a big deal. Now, you're supposed to go off of these. These are additional customization options that enhance your roleplay. They enhance the idea behind your character, and they can be so satisfying and rewarding. It may also lead to inspiration or other bonuses, I'm just saying. And they're right there. So go ahead, write your own or take the ones that are there. Maybe just add or remove a few and go off of them. You no longer need to consider every single interaction in the world to be this be-all, end-all paladin quest. No longer, no. Especially the ones below regarding vengeance and the Oath of Ancients. Some of these even go off into completely obscure routes where you're venerating life itself, and you should just go ahead and be happy and dance and you know, get all the girls from the barbarian if you can, and just be enjoyful of what you're doing in this world. Very opposed to what the canon idea behind the paladin used to be. Yes, lawful good doesn't always mean lawful nice, but being a paladin doesn't necessarily mean being, well, dumb. There you go, I said the word. So anyway, this is continued for long enough. In the next part, we're going to talk about the very special paths that you can take. We're only going to take a look at those in the player's handbook, and we're going to talk more about maybe gods and religion, specifically in 5th edition and role-playing games. And this is it from today's show. I will see you in the next happy hour show. Goodbye. Oh, and one more thing, don't forget, like if you like, dislike if you dislike. Feel free to subscribe, feel free to leave a comment, and also check out that description below. It has a lot of useful stuff. You guys are going bananas in there. Maybe Facebook? I'm just saying, okay, I'm going away. I am. All right.